Hello, students. Welcome to EasyElimu Learning Simplified. I'm your teacher, Mr. Stanley Ombogo. So, on to today's analysis of Fathers of Nations. That is, when it comes to chapter summaries, we are going to look at the chapter 4 summary. That is by digging into the episodes that we have in this chapter. So, before we go to chapter 4, episodes, let us remind ourselves, let us have a recap of the previous episode, or rather the previous summary that was about chapter 3. So, dear students, in chapter 3, we talked about 4 major episodes. So, the episodes that we talked about in chapter 3, remember chapter 3 talked about Professor Kimani's life, and some of the episodes that we had in the chapter. Number 1 was about the global economic recession. So when we talk about the global economic recession, we are simply referring to a point in time when the economic structures of a nation was not in order. Then the second episode that we were able to look at in chapter 3 was about that is Professor Kimani separating with his wife Asia Omondi. So when Professor Kimani landed his job, that is as a senior lecturer at the University of Nairobi, he made a number of changes. Then he also met, or rather, let me say that he also won the heart of campus beauty queen by the name Asia Omondi. So they got married. We are going to look at, more had been discussed about that, but just to remind you that so Professor Kimani won the heart of this beauty queen. So they later on separated. So again, the third episode that we looked at in chapter 3 was about Professor Kimani confronting an MP by the name Newborn Walomu. So this MP is also, or happens to be Professor Kimani's junior or younger colleague back at the University of Nairobi, but he is now a member of parliament. So Professor Kimani in chapter 3 confronts MP Newborn Walomu for stealing his wife, in quotes. Then again, the last episode that we were able to look at in chapter 3 of Fathers of Nation was Professor Kimani joining the Path Alpha. That is after meeting Mr. Ted Longway. So, dear students, brace up for chapter 4 summary of Fathers of Nations. And the first episode that we have, or rather, let me just mention the episode that we have in chapter 4 looking before looking at the details about each. So the first episode that we have in this chapter is traffic and convenience. It is it is something to do with Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie leaving Seamount Hotel after receiving a call from her boss. Then the second episode that we have in this chapter, dear students, is Mrs. Fiona's assignment at VOA. So I'm not going to reveal what VOA stands for right now as we are getting into the chapter. So remember, Mrs. Mackenzie is a journalist working with the Gambia News. So she has got some new assignment at the VOA. Then the last episode in this chapter is about Dr. Abiola Afolabi saving Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie. Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie. So on to the first episode, that is traffic inconvenience. So we are told that Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie leaves Seamount Hotel to see her boss. So the boss had called. Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie gets into a taxi and heads back as she had told her boss that she would be there in an hour's time. The most interesting thing here is it really going to take an hour, really? Remember, the episode is about traffic and convenience, so we have got time not taken, meaning that there is some time that has been spent more than that that was allocated. So Miss Mackenzie takes 2 hours instead because motorists and pedestrians are made to stop at the checkpoints for inspection. She is ordered by a guard to get out of the taxi at act number 22. Dear students, that's also another important detail to take. So Miss Fiona arrives late at the office because the police wanted a bribe from the taxi driver. So the guards, Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie had left the taxi driver, so she was on her foot. So while on her foot, that is after the guards turning the taxi driver upside down to, try get some loose change out of his lube robes. Sorry. He later joins Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie. So he later joins Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie. Uh, Remember, the taxi driver was a university graduate but could not be absorbed in the profession that he had trained for. So we have got unemployment there. So after catching up with Miss Fiona Mackenzie, later on, he is able to take Miss Fiona Mackenzie to her destination. So on to the second episode that is about Mrs. Fiona's assignment to the VOA. So Mrs. Mackenzie is informed by her boss that she had been pulled from the assignment at the summit at the Pinnacle Hotel. So in the interview that earlier on Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie had with Dr. Vulabi, so the interview was for the Gambia News. So this was before Mrs. Fiona Mackenzie was called to report back to the office. So while at the office, this is now after the 2 hour traffic. She gets to the office and she is informed by her boss that she has been pulled from the assignment at the summit at the Pinnacle Hotel. So she finally joins, or she is made to join the Voice of America on a 2 year loan from the Gambia News. So I've already revealed what VOA stands for. So this happens after the US policy had stopped VOA, that is Voice of America, from broadcasting in the foreign countries. So this policy had been lifted. So the VOA was now employing Africans, or rather the non-Americans, in senior positions in their company, as the new policy required them to hire local professionals over the whites whenever their conditions favored their use. So Ms. Fiona happily accepts her new role at the VOA as her new salary. So there is also a salary increment. So her salary is far much better than the two beans. That is what she used to earn back uh, at the Gambia News. So the salary is far much better. It is far much better than the two beans she received at her former workstation. So she is led to her new office by Mr. Robert Manley. So Mr. Robert Manley is the chief of the bureau. So he is the one in charge of VOA. So Mr. Manley introduces Fiona Mackenzie to a new colleague, that is Nicholas Sentinel, who is an American. So he's 25 years old and is deployed as communication technician at the VOA. So Nick has come up with a new device that is called the silent listener, dear students. So silent listener monitors a private dialogue by harvesting the sky. So when you talk about harvesting the sky, it means that it is able to get all the information using the satellites that are installed in the sky. So so far, Nick has been able to get some information and this is about, or it is between an identified person and informant. So the chief of the bureau, that is Mr. Robert Manley, tells Fiona that she is to cover the summit of the African Heads of State, and she has been selected on account of her professional expertise and the fact that she is an African. So Mrs. Mackenzie promises to deliver. Then on to the next episode. So Miss Fiona Mackenzie is finally saved by Dr. Abiola Afolabi. So in the previous episode, this is after Miss Fiona Mackenzie had been assigned, a task, dear students. So on her mission, she visits uh, Dr. Afolabi. So she calls Dr. Afolabi right before Dr. Afolabi retired to bed, asking to meet him at the reception. That is where Dr. Afolabi spent Simon Hotel. So Dr. Afolabi becomes reluctant for a while before finally coming out to meet Fiona, but does not find her. Remember, Dr. Afolabi had taken quite some time. I don't know whether to call it ego, but that is not the case. Sorry. So just before Dr. Afolabi returns to his room, that is after failing to meet Miss Fiona, he hears Miss Mackenzie screaming. The scream is all about, having been forcefully taken by a man by the name Leo, that is the Liberian Mola. So this prompts him to run to Miss Mackenzie's aid. So he saves Miss Mackenzie after winning a fight between, that is he and the Liberian Mullah, that is Leo, but is left with a scrap on his face. Uh, so he surrenders his bed, that is later on, to Miss Mackenzie. They sleep after he has been nursed the scrap on his face. Then the next thing that happens in this episode is that Miss Mackenzie uh, tells Dr. Afolabi about Nicholas Sentinel and all the information that the silent listener had, harvested. So she also talks about the four other men, and that is the end of this episode. So thank you, dear students, for keeping it easy, Elimu, and please uh, ensure that you follow the next episodes so that you have a full understanding of Fathers of Nation. One more time, I am your teacher, Mr. Stanley Ombogo, and thank you for your time. Bye.